Hey everybody, welcome back to Spike and Company. Today I'm back down on I'm not on the beach, I'm at the harbor in Pass Christian. And the weather's kind of inclement, it's cloudy, overcast, cold. I don't even know if this video's gonna come out or not. I don't know how the sound's gonna be. But as bad as it is, 162 years ago, it was a little bit worse than it is now. Not the weather so much, but the atmosphere. The Civil War was raging all through the Southeast. There were major battles going on everywhere. Pass Christian pretty much escaped all of that. There was Union blockades running ships in the Gulf and up the Mississippi and trying to take over New Orleans, which they did later on in the year. But there's a story that unfolded out here in the Sound. At the time it was called the Pass Christian Affair, or the Battle of Pass Christian, and later on became known as the BEDSHEET Surrender, and you'll understand why as I go on with the story. But I want to give credit to the Hancock County Historical Society, because almost every bit of the information that I've gotten for this story came right off of their website, and I'm going to leave a link for it in the description below, and you can go check it out for yourself. But I pretty much read the article that was written by Marty Brazil, and we want to thank Marty Brazil for the research that he's done into this, because I tried to do some other research, and to be honest, I couldn't find a whole lot about it on the internet. And at the end, we're going to try to look at some of the primary characters and what happened to them. Without going any further, let's go on and get into the story.
It all started when the Union Navy's roving blockade ship rescued a 4-year-old New Orleans girl named Alma Peniston from a foundering packet caught in a storm in the Gulf and brought her to Ship Island for the Union Army there to decide what to do with her. General Benjamin F. Butler, who had arrived on Ship Island on March the 20th, sent his Chief of Staff, Major George Strong, to Biloxi, which at that time was a small little town, to have authorities get in touch with the child's next of kin and send her to them. On April the 1st, 1862, Strong arrived off Biloxi in a small schooner and ran up a white flag of truce. The local citizens thanked the young officer and asked him to convey their gratitude to the federal authority at Ship Island. Everything was fine until Strong, while warping out of anchorage, ran aground on a sandbar off Deer Island. Before the sailors could move the small schooner off the bar, shots were fired at the stranded vessel. Some local men, not Confederate soldiers, had taken it upon themselves to fire on the stranded Yankees, who had sailed in under a white flag. After firing on Strong's schooner, they commandeered a small boat and sailed out to demand the Yankees' surrender. They had assumed correctly that the schooner was unarmed. However, they had been incorrect in assuming that Strong was stupid. As the boat neared, Strong began to yell, "Detail, attention, prepare to repel boarders." The aggressors, thinking there was a large Union force on board the vessel, withdrew. General Butler was a passionate, volatile, and emotional man, and he flew into a rage when Strong reported the incident to him. Butler's temper would cause him and the city of New Orleans much trouble over the next year, and we'll talk about that a bit later. Butler sent 2 gunboats and a screw sloop to escort to Biloxi a transport that carried the 9th Connecticut Infantry. The Connecticut Regiment was charged with getting an apology in writing for what Butler deemed cowardly conduct. On the evening of April the 2nd, the federal troops arrived in Biloxi. When the mayor refused an interview, his daughter was taken hostage. Mayor Fuel then complied with Butler's demands. Federal troops then looted the store of a man whom local Union sympathizers pointed out as one of the men who had fired on Strong's vessel. Major Cahill, who commanded the 9th Connecticut, ordered the telegraph line cut. Then he invited local slaves to escape to Ship Island and freedom. He informed Fuel that another such incident would bring about Biloxi's destruction. Mistakenly assuming that the 3rd Mississippi Infantry, then stationed at Pass Christian, had fired on the Federal forces, the transport sailed down to Mississippi City to get an apology from them. During the night, Confederate naval and Army units galvanized for defense. 7 companies of the 3rd Mississippi began a forced march eastward to save Biloxi. The other 3 companies followed somewhat later. The small Confederate naval force on the Gulf, which was 3 small gunboats, quietly sailed in among the anchored Union vessels, and an hour before dawn they opened fire. For 2 hours the ships blazed away at one another. After dawn, the Confederates disengaged and steamed to the west to the Wrigley's. Their small draft allowed them to escape into shallow water that the deep draft Union vessels couldn't negotiate. The Confederate Guard detachment at Pass Christian sighted the Union ships in the Mississippi Sound on the morning of April the 4th. Surprised, the Guards immediately set fire to bales of hay on the wharves in hope of preventing Union capture. But the Union gunboats, thinking the smoke was cannon fire, moved in and began to shell the small city of Pass Christian. Fleeing under the bombardment, the people left the town and the Confederate camp empty. The 3 companies of the 3rd Mississippi, which were down the road near present-day Long Beach, correctly determined that it was Pass Christian and not Biloxi that was under attack. Doing an about-face, they headed back toward their camp. Meanwhile, an anonymous woman in the pass hung a bedsheet from a 2nd-story window, and the Union gunboats ceased fire. The transport heaved to and began to unload the 9th Connecticut onto a wharf, which then extended way out into the water. Marching to the Confederate camp, they found it deserted. The prize, however, was the 3rd Mississippi battle flag, which had been made and presented by the ladies of Pass Christian. The Federal troops seized the flag and supplies and burned everything else. As they were leaving for the boat to return to Ship Island, the 3rd Mississippi came blazing out of the pine woods. The 9th Connecticut was driven down to the waterfront and, in an orderly manner, withdrew to their transport as the gunboats gave covering fire. After all the shooting was done, 1 Confederate soldier had been wounded, 2 were captured, and a Federal soldier had an arm wound. The Yankees had set up headquarters in the Socia House, where they received the news that they had not been fired on, but the smoke had been merely burning hay bales. After many sincere apologies, the Union officers withdrew. On the night of April 6th, Lieutenant Colonel T.A. Mellon of the 3rd Mississippi went out to Ship Island with a request for an audience with the 9th Connecticut's commander. Mellon demanded his colors be returned. Cahill refused. Mellon insisted the colors had been stolen and not seized bravely in battle. Cahill laughed and bid Mellon a good evening. And so it was that the battle flag of the 3rd Mississippi Infantry became the first Confederate battle flag taken by Union forces during the Civil War. Years later, in 1885, an older, wiser, and retired Major Cahill returned the battle flag to Mr. T.A. Mellon on Connecticut Day ceremonies in New Orleans.
That's pretty interesting, isn't it? Who would have thought that all that was going on right out here in the Sound, ships running back and forth and everything. And as I touched on in the story, General Butler was not well liked in the South, especially in New Orleans. Butler was a notorious character. He was a dictator of New Orleans. He was hated down there. He passed a resolution that any woman that insulted a Union soldier would be considered nothing more than a prostitute with no rights and no privileges and no status at that time. They were forbidden to say anything negative toward or about a Union soldier. Now, That's not all they were guilty of. They were guilty of throwing full chamber pots out the window on the heads of Union soldiers as they passed below. And I think the most famous of those was Farragut. I think he was an admiral, Admiral Farragut, the best I can remember. So the ladies of New Orleans were not happy at all with General Spoons Butler, as he was called. And he was called Spoons because there was a lady that was stopped at a checkpoint, and they weren't supposed to be carrying anything other than their clothes and money, but she had a sterling silver service with her, and he confiscated it. And he was notorious for going around and confiscating items, going into people's homes and confiscating items as it was considered contraband. He was confiscating property, commandeering property for his own use. So needless to say, his tenure didn't last long in New Orleans. He was recalled by Abraham Lincoln and brought back to Washington. But he went on to have a pretty successful career and served in a lot of public offices, and one of those was governor of Massachusetts. As I said, he was recalled in December of 1862, but he died in Washington, D.C. on January the 11th, 1893 at the age of 74. One of the other characters was Major George Strong. He was wounded on July the 18th of 1863 at Morris Island, South Carolina, and transferred to New York, where he later died of tetanus. One of the other characters I tried so hard to find something out about was a little Alma Peniston, the little 4-year-old that was rescued in the Gulf during the storm out there. And as hard as I tried, I couldn't find out anything about her, and I thought that was a shame. But if you made it this far and you liked this video, give us a thumbs up. And if you haven't already subscribed, please do so. I would appreciate it. It would help the channel. It encourages me, and it would help with the algorithm. Again, thank you for coming along, and we'll catch you on the next one.